Good afternoon. I'm Jan DeVault and this is Greg Dimmick, and we are your hostess and host for today's episode of the Public Affairs, Public Access of Houston Media Source. And we are here as representatives of the San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy. And we'd like to talk a little bit today about saving and protecting the San Jacinto Battleground and explain some of the threats and actually something about our organization and some of the threats that have faced the battleground over the years. It's changed a lot, hasn't it, Greg?
It really has. Jan, we should tell them a little bit about ourselves, I think why
so
we're
too.
here being filmed. I will start with myself, and then you can add your qualifications here. You're far more qualified than I am. I actually am a pediatrician, and I stumbled across the Mexican Army in Wharton County in about 1996, I believe. And we actually found the archaeological artifacts, and I started doing archival work, and I became very interested in the Mexican Army. And one of my great dreams after that was if I would ever get to work at the San Jacinto Battleground, because I knew that that was like the greatest Mexican Army archaeological site from the Alamo period by far. So I was very interested, and I got an opportunity to come and help the professional archaeologists here do professional archaeology, and we right away started finding just thousands of artifacts, wonderful artifacts on the battleground itself.
In fact, you're wearing a T-shirt.
I'm wearing a T-shirt from
the very first systematic archaeological survey that was ever done at San Jacinto.
They had never done archaeology at the battleground trying to find the battle.
Right.
They had tried, when they put in pipes and stuff, they would do some archaeology, but this was the first time they'd ever found battle-related artifacts, and we found a lot of artifacts.
Yes, you did.
So I got to do the archaeology. I became a speaker, and I've spoken on this subject a lot. And you asked me to be a member of the San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy.
Right.
And I'm on the board of directors. And I was actually appointed the chairman of the archaeology committee, I think, because you didn't have any other people with archaeological experience.
You were the only one, and we're all volunteers.
Yeah.
We're all volunteers.
Yeah.
And my background is actually oil and gas. I started out as a landman landman, that's what they call it, in Midland, Texas, and have also worked in the financial realm for the oil and gas industry all of my life. One of the things I think that was so compelling about this battlefield was the fact that we knew early on the state did not own all of what should have been the San Jacinto battlefield. So we had a great relationship at the time with Texas Parks and Wildlife, and there were certain things that they needed help doing. And part of it, I think, was raising money. Part of it was definitely archaeology. And then also, from time to time, they needed money even to help buy land. So over the course, our organization was founded in 2002. Jeff Dunn, who will be with us, and Jeff is coming in from Dallas, Greg Dimmick, Greg Dimmick and a few others had this wild idea that we really needed to help the state of Texas in protecting this treasure, this national treasure. So we have done absolutely some strange things we never knew that we were capable of doing, and we've all done it as volunteers. But right now we own approximately 30 acres of the battleground, and that is land that some of the veterans said when in fact, just maybe a little history about the battlefield itself, because very few people realize that the battlefield did not come into being as a whole. The battle was fought, of course, in 1836 until about 1901. And it was pasture, there was a little town of San Jacinto. And what had happened, the public, that none of the land was held by the state. And one of the decisions that was made by, actually it was the Daughters of the Republic of Texas in 1891, is that something needs to be done at San Jacinto. So they started actually lobbying the state of Texas, and over the years were able to persuade the state to come up with money to buy the original 300 and some odd acres of the battlefield. Now already some businessmen from Galveston in the 1880s had placed the Brigham Monument, and we'll go by the Brigham Monument. But we'd like to just tell you a few things about what's gone on at San Jacinto. And you can see this is absolutely beautiful. We're standing by the Lynchburg Ferry, and the Lynchburg Ferry has been here since the 1820s. A gentleman by the name of Nathaniel Lynch had a ferry. It was this was not quite so large. There were not these fabulous ships that were going. There was not actually a Houston ship channel, but what he did is he ferried people across the river here, and it is still in use. It's a free ferry, and it has been it's been a wonderful. It's been wonderful for the people of Harris County actually to have the Lynchburg Ferry. But the Lynchburg Ferry also played an important role in the Texas Revolution in that, and Greg actually is the Texas Revolutionary expert, but when everyone remembers the Alamo, after Goliad, Sam Houston's army was actually, he concentrated his army here. And Santa Anna, who had been looking for him, or Sam Houston, for some time, actually started camping on, what was it, the 18th of April?
At New Washington, down at New Washington.
So was actually the Lynchburg Ferry was sort of a culmination point of the Harrisburg-Lynchburg Road. So you had, when Santa Anna, after the Alamo, you had a lot of settlers coming up from East and South Texas. You had over 5,000 people that would have been gathered somewhat near this site to get across that river to go to what they hoped would be protection in the United States. So with that, I don't know if we can pan around. This is only a small portion of the industry now, what you're seeing. But there are at least 46 major petrochemical plants, and San Jacinto, the battlefield, sits right smack dab in the middle of them. And no one is saying that's a bad thing, but what is very interesting is that these petrochemical plants actually are driving the economy of Harris County. So, you know, this is a wonderful site, and there is no reason why we cannot cooperate with industry in preserving it. So shall we just sort of start down?
Yeah, I would say besides the industry that surrounds the site, there's still a threat to the battleground, and that is that, like you said, we have 30 acres, but every once in a while other land comes up for sale.
That's right.
And we try to get that land, if at all possible, and keep it from being developed. There's a lot of development. The De Zavala site was right across Buffalo Bio here, and the De Zavala site has basically been eaten up with industry. It almost doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And that's a real shame. And right across the road here was what was called Torrey Hill. And the Texans and the Americans that were loyal to Mexico and didn't want to fight, they stood over there. They stood on top of that hill and watched the battle, expecting the Mexicans to win, and then they were going to move in and help celebrate with the Mexicans about this great victory. So the Tories were right over there. Well, it's gone now. It's been It's been removed.
You can't even see a remnant of Torrey Hill, can you?
Right, it's gone. But another thing happened that made it the battleground, and this is non-intentional. It wasn't anybody's fault. Another thing that happened was subsidence.
Right.
And because of all the drilling and the water wells and everything like that, this subsidence caused about 10 feet. We're going this way, I think.
Okay.
Caused about 10 feet of the whole area dropped. So a lot of the battleground now is underwater, and that's particularly important with our project that we're talking about today, is the subsidence.
We have lost. We've lost approximately 150 acres, at least, of the battlefields, and it's actually when you start looking at the old maps, and this is something that I think Greg and some of the other members of the San Jacinto Battleground Conservancy, they're great archivists, and Sorry, we're getting the keys to the car. But they're great archivists, and they have studied these maps. And the one that I think we found that is probably the most accurate is a map from a gentleman by the name of Henderson Yoakum. And Henderson Yoakum was trained at West Point, and we believe that actually he and Sam Houston walked this battlefield prior to the publication of his map. And that, on everything that we've done as far as georeferencing, is the most accurate map, Greg, would you say?
And while we're headed over there, I'll try to give the folks a little bit of background about what's going on this evening with our meeting that we're going to be televising. What happens is that because of subsidence, one of the major portions of the battleground, which is called Boggy Bayou today, is now deep underwater. And I say deep, we don't know exactly how much water is on top of it. At the time of the battle, the Mexican army was camped, and this ravine was behind them. And the ravine is described as probably being about 8 to 12 feet deep. And at the time of the battle, there was water in it. It was probably about chest deep for the Mexican soldiers. Well, when Sam Houston attacked, surprisingly, on the afternoon of the 21st of April, the Mexican army was routed immediately, and they started a flight from their Mexican camp. Well, Boggy Bayou, this ravine, was behind them, and they had to go through it. And this was a big impediment to their retreat. So these Mexicans got hung up in there. A lot of them probably we know a lot of them were killed in that ravine. We know that they lost a lot of gear and equipment. We have several period references to this, that they were hung up in that bayou. Most of them got across it, but a lot of them were killed in the bayou. Now that subsidence has caused that ravine to be totally underwater now. And that's the problem, is that archaeology has never been done there. Proper archaeology has never been done there.
And I'll interrupt for a minute, Greg, because this is part of the property over to the right here that we actually bought fairly recently. And that area has been fascinating from what we found archaeologically through the efforts of one of Greg's committee members, a gentleman by the name of Larry Golden. And there have been trade beads, there have been Mexican buttons, there has actually been Civil War memorabilia, there have been all sorts of dolls in pipes that have been taken from the town of San Jacinto, because shortly after the battle, a town grew up, and this would have been the area of the town, but yet it played a very important role in the battle because both armies used that Harrisburg-Lynchburg road, and then you had after that you had the runaway scrape. The people used it to get across the river, and then they used it to get back home.
And how many acres do we own here, Jan?
Roughly on this side, we own about 30 acres.
And it goes basically up to the Battleship Texas, right?
In front of the Battleship Texas, actually.
Okay.
But part of the site we bought, that it was part of the old San Jacinto town site, was owned by the widow of Lorenzo de Zavala. And Lorenzo de Zavala, Greg was talking about just a minute ago, that his house was located across. I don't really know how narrow the river might have been at that time, but it was located across, and some of the wounded were taken to Lorenzo de Zavala's house. But he died shortly after the battle, I believe, within a year, and as a result, he had his widow. His widow married again, and they actually owned a sawmill. And then that same sawmill, and there were also shipyards here, were used during the Civil War.
Here's the battleship, Jan.
Yes, this is the Battleship Texas, right here, and that is a great old ship that has received about $50 million from the state of Texas the last two sessions of the legislature to repair it. And it was moored here in 1948, and I think one of the things that's it's unique. It's a dreadnought. It's a dreadnought, and
Do you want to pull over so we can?
Yeah. What I'm going to do? Let me talk about the ship for
Okay,
just a second.
sure.
But it's a dreadnought, and let me show you where the Texans were actually buried here. The ship was put into what was a part of Sam Houston's camp, and that slip has been enlarged over the years. But this is actually where the. Let me see if we can get. This may be as close as we can get to it. But you'll see over. And it's shaded, so you may not have a very good view. But there is a big obelisk that was put there in 1883, and that marks the graves of the people, the Texans who died at San Jacinto. And we have done some archaeology there, and it's been very interesting, led by Greg's group. We did some remote sensing. We found about 11 unmarked, 11 what we believe were grave shafts. We did this in 2000, I believe it was 2006. And we found, was it a silver spur? We think we found some fire pits. That we think we may know now where there was a big explosion. And we using a lot of these newer techniques. Well, metal detecting has been a staple of what we have helped Parks and Wildlife do, but also the remote sensing.
What we basically found was, I think, pretty absolute evidence about where the Mexican prisoner of war camp was. We know from their archives, we know from depositions from Mexicans that were in the battle and were captured and later made it back to Mexico. We know that the prisoners of war were camped in the middle of, basically between two of the divisions of the Texas Army, and we know they were camped right near where the Texans were buried. And sure enough, we started finding all kinds of Mexican Army artifacts, musket balls. We found some Spanish coins from that period and that sort of material. So we're almost positive that the Mexican prisoner of war camp was right here. And the Texas Army, we know in different divisions, they didn't camp as a unit, but different divisions were camped all along this place. It's unfortunate that in 1941 you said that when the battleship needed a place to rest?
It was actually 46, 47.
Okay. This was apparently the only open access water that the state owned at the time.
Correct.
So it wasn't like people said, oh, we need to put it at San Jacinto. It was like, well, there's no place else to put it but San Jacinto. And back in the day, that was not a huge deal for people.
The views of archaeology have changed in battlefield preservation.
Right. That's exactly right. Back then it was more to memorialize it. Vicksburg's a good example. It used to be in the old days, you went to Vicksburg, there were monuments everywhere, there were statues everywhere, there was cyclorama. Well, this is similar. Here's a propeller right here from the battleship. There's all kinds of stuff here, but that nowadays people are more interested in trying to get the battleground back the way it was. They talk about interpreting the battle. People can come out here, if we make it the way it was in 1836, people can come out here and walk the battlefield and have a feeling for the way what the Texans were seeing on that day as they advanced, what the Mexicans felt when all of a sudden the Texans showed up, this kind of stuff. So a lot of the more modern thinking is to be able to put the battlefield back the way it was at the time and interpret it properly. And that doesn't just include monuments and markers and stuff. The topography is part of it.
Well, and look at the San Jacinto Monument. That's a prime example right there of historic preservation and something that was popular in the 1930s. And what happened, and if you squint your eyes from almost the edge of the water, and the shoreline, the edge of the water here has subsided a great deal. There was a rise, and then there was a ravine. I guess you would call it a ravine.
Just a lower spot.
Yeah, a low spot, and that was the way that the soldiers were able to actually surprise the Mexicans. But it's a beautiful monument. But in building the monument and building the reflecting pool, no telling how many hundreds of artifacts were probably lost that would have told us something about the battle. But it's it's the largest, I believe, masonry monument in the entire world.
One of the plans when the master plan, I believe it was called, was that 1994, Jan?
It was adopted by Texas Parks and Wildlife in 1998.
Okay. One of their plans was to take out the reflecting pool. And obviously they weren't going to move the monument or anything like that, but the reflecting pool apparently is in very poor condition, and it leaks and it floods, and so that was part of the plan, but so far they have not done that. It's been interesting to see their priorities about what they feel like needs to be restored and what doesn't, and on occasion we've been a little disappointed on some of their decision making as to what to put into the park that to us will decrease the visual image of the battle at the time.
And when Greg says they, he's talking about Texas Parks and Wildlife. Up until 1965, there was actually a state board of control, and there was also another state agency that basically merged into Texas Parks and Wildlife. And they maintain hundreds, about 100 parks, as I recall. And Greg was mentioning interpretation, and this is one of the things that is somewhat lacking. You come to San Jacinto, you can't understand, you can't really see how the battle unfolded. And part of that, the only thing that has actually remained, there are these granite, there's 18 of them here on the battlefield, and they were placed actually in 1901. The veterans of the battle, those that were
left. Here's one of them right here.
Right. The veterans of the battle actually came out and put iron posts, and then in 1910, 11, and 12, the San Jacinto chapter of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas put the granite markers where the iron posts had been. So that has been for well over 100 years now, the major piece of interpretation of the battle. And and we'll go down to the site of greatest carnage. What we're finding is that some of these are fairly accurate, or I think that's what, and I love the word ground truthing, because that is what archaeology does. And particularly, the ground tells you the truth about what happened where. And you've got, you have these, well, let me mention one other thing. You have these wonderful artifacts that are in danger now if we put more dredge material out here, in danger of being lost forever. But some of these markers we're finding are not accurately placed, and we found there's one of them to Almonte surrender site, and through an American Battlefield Protection Program grant, we believe we found what was Almonte surrender site, and it's a mile and a half south of the San Jacinto Monument on private property. But one of the other things I think that we've been involved with, and we're very, very proud of, is the prairie restoration, which I don't know if you can see the prairie, but we were able to, with the help of Shell Oil Company, able to restore about 100 acres of land, and hopefully and I didn't realize it took years to make a prairie, but it takes years.
She's talking about the longer grass out there that looks brown. That is original prairie. We used the same grasses that would have been here at the time, and so that's how the prairie would have looked. Of course, it would have been a little greener in April, but
and it was pretty cold that day too, in April 21st. And you can see the power lines, and the power lines are also impede telling the story of the battle when you get right down to it.
And just about everywhere you look, you can see industry. And it's not terribly unusual. I mean, it's getting better, but I know I drove up here to speak one time on the Mexican Army at the San Jacinto Monument, and when I got there, I found out there was what do they call it in place? evacuation in place.
Oh, shelter in place.
Shelter in place,
Shelter in
and there
place,
was like
yeah.
I think it was like a little orangish tinge to
Yes.
the air, and my eyes were watering. So this is a wonderful place, but Jan and I have talked about it before. If we could move the battle site to a better area, we would do that. We would be glad to move the battleground, because there's so much surrounding this area and so much industry, and industry is going to have their gas leaks and this kind of stuff, and it's kind of frightening in a way. This we're now starting to get close to what's called boggy bile. This was the upper end of a ravine. We don't think the Mexican Army crossed right here, but a little further to our left is probably where they crossed this ravine. But you can see with subsidence it's underwater now. But this is the big issue about the meeting tonight. You can actually see some dredge work being done out there on the far edge. We'll get closer to that. But what their plan is, Texas Parks and Wildlife, and they want to do marsh restoration. Once again, they want to put the battleground back the way it was in 1836, and we admire that. But they have decided to do it without doing any archaeology in that boggy bio, in that ravine. It's interesting because the company that's doing this restoration, the engineering company, they have archaeologists that work for them, and they did a report that said that they didn't find anything in boggy bile, but we got a hold of the report, and they only did 13 borings. They took a bore of the mud from under the water, and only 2 of them were in the area that we think the Mexican Army crossed the ravine. And those 2, they didn't find any artifacts in those 2 borings, so their conclusion was there's no artifacts there, so there shouldn't be any impact if you put all this dredge material on top of it to recreate the marsh. Well, we think that study was inadequate, and it's interesting because Texas Parks and Wildlife, even though they approved that archaeological report that said there wasn't any artifacts, their biggest argument against doing any archaeology here is that they are convinced that there are human remains in here, that some of the Mexican dead are still there, and they do not want to disturb them. They say it's dishonorable to disturb the dead, and they don't want to move them. A lot of people think that it would not be dishonorable if we were to excavate the remains, if there are any there, we don't know, and have a cemetery out here, have a memorial cemetery, or obviously we'd offer them to the Mexican government first so they could be repatriated and buried in Mexico with honors. But if not, we could do it out here. But Texas Parks and Wildlife is vehemently against that.
You can see, Greg, just right over there where they're already building the levee to hold this dredge spoil. Mm-hmm. And this project has moved so quickly. There had been, in 2014, there had been one of the industry partners out here who had proposed doing a similar project. And we met with Parks and Wildlife then. We expressed our interest in the archaeology, and then we also had talked to the industry partner. And as far as we were concerned, we thought the project was dead. We also talked to the Army Corps of Engineers, who has to issue all of these permits, and applied for, under federal law, it's called a Section 106 review, and applied for a consulting party status. And we've done that on several different occasions here at San Jacinto. We did it when they were repairing the battleship Texas. We've done it for pipelines, not only at San Jacinto, but in areas that are outside of the state property. And just trying to make sure that people understand the significance of this site. There's no other place. If it were not for San Jacinto, there would be no Texas. Just simply because it happened where it happened. It's like Greg says, we cannot move this battlefield. But that doesn't mean that industry shouldn't respect it, and that we shouldn't try to get information from what we can find here. If we destroy that, then this is an irreparable loss. And the thing that there are other battlefields where actually they're looking for where people were buried. Waterloo is one of them right now, and we are not bone hunters. We are not bone hunters. Primarily, we want to know more about the Mexican Army, what kinds of weaponry they carried, and we want to know more about their paths of flight. One of the things that we haven't discovered yet, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we don't really know where the Mexican camp was. And with that many soldiers, you would think there would be some remnants somewhere of the Mexican camp. But I think we have a pretty good idea, but not enough has been done yet.
I would say that what their plan is they're going to, in their marsh restoration, and the report from the engineering company, this archaeologist, says specifically that they're going to put 4 meters or 13 feet of dredge material on that. And we take issue with them doing it before they do the archaeology. We are convinced that if they put 13 feet of dredge material on top of that site, the archaeology will never get done. We have concerns about whether the dredge material is clean or not. It's taken from downstream from the San Jacinto battleground on the San Jacinto River, and we know there's a huge dioxin leak upstream of the battleground, and so that is a concern that this could be material that's polluted, and the boggy bio, we feel like most likely is not polluted, so they'd be introducing polluted material into a sterile area.
In fact, I think the dioxins that Greg is speaking about, that is a Superfund site, and there's been a big lawsuit with Harris County that has just recently settled. But you know, some of these things are just are deadly, so deadly to human beings. And we know that there are postings around here on the amount of fish that you should eat from the bio. There's are crabbing, and they're asking people not to go into the water in certain places. So you know, it's a concern. Now we're not alarmists, but it's just something that we need to see. It would be nice to know that the proper permits have been issued and that these have been done, that taken into consideration that this is an area that people will want to use, and is it going to be safe? And unfortunately, we have not seen those environmental studies. So we're hoping that those have been done, but we don't know that. And this is the thing, I think, that I had mentioned 2014. In 2014, we had said basically the same thing. We're concerned about what's happened, the respect that needs to be shown to these 630 plus, between 600 and 700 Mexican soldiers that died here. And we're also very much concerned about what the kinds of material that would be placed here. So those are still our concerns today. And I think that what is very concerning is the fact that there have not been public meetings, and it seems like this has been so exclusively driven by, whether it's the Corps or whether it's the industry or whether it is Texas Parks and Wildlife. Basically, they have shut off public comment. And one of the first messages when we brought this up, and we learned on January the 15th that this project was going forward and that it was imminent, and that was in an email. And we asked Parks and Wildlife to do a public hearing, which is what we're going to be doing in about 30 minutes. But there are people, in fact, we have members of our organization that are actual descendants of the people that died here at San Jacinto on the Mexican side. They were not asked how they felt about it. And again, we are not bone hunters. We want to.
Do you want to point this site out right here, Jan?
Go down there and get out?
Sure.
Yeah, we can do that. What we're going to do is take a little detour right here. And there used to be an old road that crossed a boggy bayou right here, but it's with subsidence, it's underwater. But you can see the work that's being done across the way. But we think right in this general area, we're not sure where, but right in this general area is where the Mexican Army, the majority of them had to cross and get into the ravine. And you can see right across the way here, there's a marker, a granite marker over there. That marker used to be on this side, but they moved it to that side. But basically, we believe that this is the trail. If you go back towards the monument and then go towards that marker, we think that's the main trail of the Mexican Army, and we think this is about where most of the soldiers would have crossed. Now, the interesting thing is, every map that we have of 1910 and older does not show any marsh in this area. We are convinced that when they say they're restoring the battleground to the 1836 period, it's not exactly true. There was a lot of marsh further downstream here, but there was not marsh in this area. We think that...
So this was prairie, you
This
think?
was prairie going up to the edge of this ravine. And then I'm sure the ravine was terribly muddy, and they say it was waist deep, but there wasn't marsh in this area yet. For some reason, they want to extend the marsh just up to about the point where I think that they're going to make sure to bury the entire archaeological site. And I think that's because they are worried about the Mexican dead. They don't want to disturb them, but I don't know why they think that they get to make a unilateral decision as to what's honorable for these Mexican dead. I think they ought to take into account what the Hispanic organizations think, what Mexican history professors think. They know probably a lot more about the practices of the Mexican Army at the time. My experience, and I've done a lot of archival work on the Mexican Army, I don't want to brag, but probably more than anybody else.
I think that's probably accurate.
I think they pretty
You're
much,
sort of obsessed.
If they had the opportunity, they buried their dead and gave them a military burial. That wasn't always possible, and
Well,
certainly there are
know.
exceptions, but I think that would be the practice of the time if given the opportunity.
We do know at San Jacinto that Santa Anna was given the opportunity of burying his dead, and because he was ashamed of them, he said they did not deserve to be buried. So the bodies, in fact, that same ferry, when people were coming back from the runaway scrape, they described having to drag bodies off of the road. So I think we do know that Mrs. McCormick, Peggy McCormick, after some time actually petitioned what became Harris County for money to bury the Mexican dead, and she and some of her neighbors got, because they were poisoning the milk, I think the bones were poisoning the milk
cattle
of their cows.
were chewing on the bones, and
Yeah.
it spoiled the milk, is
Yeah,
what they
yeah.
said. Yeah.
So as a result, what happened is they took what bodies they could find, what bones they could find, and they were
Do you
put
want
into
to
a
stop
trench.
here for a second, Jan?
Sure.
Right out here to our left is the general area of where the Mexican Army would have been. We've done archaeology in this area, once again under the supervision of professional archaeologists. We would never come out here and do any looting, but we've worked with professional archaeologists. This shirt I have, you can't see it, but on the back it's got a belt plate of the Guerrero Battalion. We found it right out here. And we've actually done some archival work recently in the last year or two that helps explain what we found out here. There was a Guerrero Battalion chest plate found way out in front of where we think the Mexican camp was, and we've recently found good evidence that there was a counterattack at the Battle of San Jacinto, and the archaeology goes along with it. So it's just, to me, fascinating stuff. I was talking to Jan earlier today. They say that the Texas Parks and Wildlife said, well, the artifacts that are in Boggy Bayou that we're going to bury, they aren't going to really significantly change our knowledge, and I couldn't agree less. To me, that's totally...
What do you think is missing in our knowledge, Greg, as
well,
far as...
I told Jan, we don't even know for sure whether the twin sisters were 4-pounders or 6-pounders. People love to argue about that. We could very possibly find a cannonball in Boggy Bayou. That's where I would say that it's very likely to end up, is the cannonballs from the twin sisters could have been shot in there. There could be rifles and muskets and sabers. There's a big argument among Mexican Army guys. Did the Mexican Army have English Baker rifles, which were the hot new thing of the time? Almost all the military historians say yes, they had them. I've never found any archival record that mentioned Baker rifles. I've had a few rifles, and in our whole Sea of Mud excavation, we never found any. But then again, they weren't going to let go of their Baker rifles, and most of the best troops that would have had Baker rifles were here at San Jacinto, not in the retreating army of the Sea of Mud. So I would love to know if they had Baker rifles or not. There's a lot of information to be gained if we could do this archaeology.
Well, this is also part of the marsh restoration. This is the phase 1 part of it over here. And our one very small contribution was through, again, it was a grant from, it was from the Children of the Republic of Texas, and also Shell. And we were able to build one of the way stations out there. And this is a beautiful trail. It's a beautiful trail. And this is also the site when this was opened in the early part, it would have been maybe 2002, 2003. We held a funeral mass because there was nothing in the literature that we could find that there was any sort of religious service. And we had, I think it was, well, he wasn't a cardinal then, but Donardi, and we had an Ron Pope, who was an Episcopalian. We had a Baptist minister, and it was actually a wonderful bringing together of people to honor these souls who had never been properly prayed over or put to rest. So that to my knowledge is the only thing, and there may be other things, but that's the only thing that has been done to memorialize the Mexican soldiers.
We're going to go into the monument now?
Yes, I think we should. I think we should go into the monument, and let's ride the elevator to the top. You've got a great view of a great view of the battlefield, and maybe we can, if we're lucky enough, and the sun holds out, we can show you. And that's actually the reflection pond is looking pretty big. It's got a mud bottom, by the way, and I think that's part of the reason it doesn't reflect.
Joe had called, left a text message if it makes a difference.
Okay, thank you. It's a beautiful day for a picture of that monument, and you look at you look at the words, which Lewis Kemp is responsible for most of the words around the monument, but it pretty well tells the story of the importance of San Jacinto and how so much of the United States was won, if you will, at this battle. It's interesting too that one of the biggest events that they have that Parks and Wildlife helps to oversee is a reenactment of the battle. And this year it's going to be on April the 23rd. But you've got thousands of people that come out and bring their families, and they get a great education on living history. And there's a very dedicated group of reenactors that do this. And again, they're volunteers, and all of this is free. And I can see the monument, it looks like it's already filling up with people.
That's good.
Yes.
Good.
I think they're probably as interested as we are.
You talk about the reenactment, Jan.
Yes.
One of the things that, and I was really proud of the reenactors and the Texas Army when we started doing the archaeology.
Right.
And we found that they were doing their reenactment right on top of the battleground, because we were finding, we found bayonets, we found ramrods, we found lots of musket balls. So basically they were doing their reenactment right on top of the part of the original battle site. And
could you tell the equipment apart?
We did find a few artifacts that we felt were modern, but it was pretty obvious. But as soon as we found that there was still artifacts and that they were right on the battle, they moved and started doing the reenactor in a less sensitive part of the battleground. Yeah. And that was exciting. And to me, that once again, that's how much the archaeology can mean to people and really change things.